podcast powered by KSLSports.com. Good afternoon to Cougar Nation, and welcome on into a Monday edition of the program. It's always live at high noon on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's always powered by KSLSports.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports on all the social media platforms. And away we go on today's edition of the show where we're talking all things in the world of BYU sports. Here's the roadmap for today's edition of the show. Returning production in college football, the latest on where BYU stacks up in terms of players and production coming back in college football for the 2022 season. Spoiler, it's really good for BYU. How do they stack up against their opponents? We'll look at that. Also, the top returning starters for BYU. What would an SEC-only college football playoff mean for BYU and the Big 12? We'll hit on that. And the top impact freshmen for BYU in 2022 that I believe are going to be the 10 guys that you need to know this upcoming fall. And then we'll get a quick update on BYU baseball as they get ready for the WCC Tournament, and a shout out to Elijah Bryant. But we start things off with the returning production in college football. Bill Connolly from ESPN, creator of the S&P Plus ratings, he released an updated returning production list, and BYU checks in at number 2 in the nation with the second most returning production in college football at 85% going into 2022. No surprise, they've been there since he released this ranking back in February. So it's pretty noteworthy. BYU's got a ton of returning production next season. I think it's one of the reasons why there's so much optimism about this BYU team. The schedule is, I think, the toughest it's been since maybe the 2016 season, since Kalani Sitake took over the BYU program, because the quality of the Power 5 teams that BYU will face this year is better than what they saw last season when they faced 7 P5s. But when you have so much returning production, you've got the talent at quarterback, you've got a great offensive line, elite wide receivers, tons of returning production on the defense. Can it come together to produce a top 25, top 30 defense? It lends itself to a lot of optimism to have, say, a 10, maybe 11-win season. It's not unreasonable to project BYU as an 11-win team in 2022. It's not. I'm still going with 9-3, but I think 11 wins is still doable for BYU because of how much talent they have returning. If they can stay healthy, injuries have been massive for BYU the past few years. I know every team has a ton of injuries. That's part of college football, part of football in general. It's a violent sport. But it just seems like BYU was digging into their 4th and even 5th string in some positions at the tail end of last season. It was crippling how impactful the injuries were for BYU last season. What's also noteworthy, though, and reason for optimism going into 2022 for BYU to have a special year, how they stack up against their opposition in terms of returning production. Again, this is updated by Bill Connolly, the latest returning production as of today. USF, the opener on September 3rd, 103 days away from today. BYU, USF. USF also brings back 85% returning production. They are number 3 in the nation. I'm telling you, folks, I've been warning you since January. This USF game is going to be dicey. It just is. And it's not an indicator of suddenly, oh, BYU can't have a special year. Week ones are always a crapshoot. It would be an amazing thing if BYU went into Tampa and just took care of business and crushed the Bulls. BYU is a 12-point favorite by the early odds makers in that game. And I think that's fair because USF was a 2-win football team. They've only won, I think, 1 FBS game under Jeff Scott the last 2 years. USF is not a winning program, but I believe they are going to throw the kitchen sink at that game. That is the tone setter for USF. And you think about the storylines into that game. USF is looking to do everything in their power to get into the Big 12 conference because they're angry that UCF, not them, were the ones that got in. BYU's going into the Big 12. It's a narrative builder for their program to get donations from boosters. They've got to have that game, and it's at home. They beat BYU in 2019. There's still a little bit of carryover personnel-wise from a couple years back, and they bring a bunch of transfer portal guys, 14 in total, including Gary Bohannon from Baylor. So USF is number 3 on this list. Baylor, they are 122nd, 47% returning production. They lose Bohannon. A lot of guys gone from Baylor last season. Petrie's gone. The running back Abram Smith's gone. A lot of notable guys are gone from that Baylor team that won the Big 12 last year. I think it's one of the reasons why BYU, by the way too early lines, have Baylor as an underdog going into Provo. Oregon, 64%. They're 72nd nationally. Wyoming, the second to last team, the penultimate team on the list, 129, 35% returning production. Utah State, 119th. Notre Dame, 54th. Arkansas, 69th. Liberty, 111th. East Carolina, 36th. Boise State, 29th. And Stanford, this is surprising, 5th. Stanford was a horrendous football team last year. That's another game that's interesting to me because if it was week 1, I think BYU would blow the doors off Stanford. But I think Stanford, with how much they return and with it being Thanksgiving weekend, and it's on the road for BYU, that could be a completely different Stanford team than the one I think everyone's expecting going into this season. David Shaw, I think, has regressed quite a bit for the Cardinal, but this has got to be one of those years where you've got to make 7-8 wins at least, because if he doesn't, I think he's on the hot seat. Stanford brings back Tanner McKee at quarterback, once a BYU target. For some reason, he'll always be a BYU storyline, even though he has no connections to BYU other than he's LDS. I've never understood that, honestly, why the BYU echo chamber tends to always just treat a guy that's like a BYU guy, but he has no connections to the school. He doesn't even live in Utah. Anyway, beside the point. Boise State, they are the 3rd most returning production on this list for BYU's opponents. I thought that was kind of interesting. That's a sneaky, tough game. Again, the blue turf. I don't look at Boise State like I did back in the day when they had Kellen Moore, Ryan Dinwiddie, Jared Zabransky. That was the heyday of Boise State football from about 2003, 2011. That was their golden era. That was their decade, like BYU's was for the 80s. That was Boise State football. Ever since, it's been really good. They win a lot of ball games, but they're not as good. I don't know how to describe it, but they're not as feared as they once were during that stretch. But they beat BYU last year, so that'll be a revenge game for BYU. Another interesting stat on BYU that gives you reason for optimism that this could be a special year for the Cougars. Most returning starters in college football in 2022. BYU is number 1, 19 returning starters. A lot of that is predicated on, 1, the injuries. 2, BYU will give starts to pretty much anyone. It's amazing, especially on the defensive side. Typically, I remember back in the days with Lavelle, you could just be blindfolded and you know who the starters were week in, week out. They were not changing it up. Defenses today, a lot more multiple, a lot of different looks, adapting to what the offense you're going to face week in, week out. I get all that. But BYU throws around starts like crazy. They throw around game snaps like crazy on the defensive side. But BYU's number 1 with 19 returning starters. USF, again, number 2, 18. Troy, 18. And then there's no other BYU opponents on the list. But BYU, number 1, USF, number 2. 103 days till kick. BYU, USF. Going to be a good game. I'm telling you, that's going to be a fun week 1 opener. Can't wait to see when the kick times get released a little bit later in the week. Speaking of college football, a story that caught my attention this morning from Pete Thamel at ESPN that I feel has a definite ripple effect on BYU, the Big 12 Conference, that I think is worth monitoring going forward. The SEC, they're having their spring meetings this week, and I think a lot of people will focus on Jimbo versus Saban, and I love that. I mean, you heard me last week. That battle was just incredible. I love that type of content. But the SEC is going to have their spring meetings in Destin, Florida, and there's a possibility, Pete Thamel threw out the idea because Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, confirmed it's one of the possibilities in their playoff conversations, in SEC-only playoff format. That to me is wild. It's bizarre, but then when you think about how many national champions come from the SEC, which is pretty much every year outside of Clemson, who's built like an SEC team, Florida State in 2013 built like an SEC team then, and Ohio State, when they had Urban, they were kind of built like an SEC team. The SEC going interleague only for the playoff because they're going to go to 16 teams beginning in 2025. Definitely worrisome. And the future of the playoff, I think, is something that is concerning. And I don't think many people realize, at least locally here and that covered the Big 12, realized how significant it was that it didn't get pushed through the 12-team playoff this past spring. Staying at 4 through 2025 and having nothing in concrete stone for the future after 2025 is a bit concerning. I think that the Big 12 conference, the good thing is that the Big 12 was on the side of Greg Sankey in the SEC. They wanted a 12-team playoff. Now, that was Bob Bowlesby, who's going to be leaving soon. I get all that. But I think it is good that there's a working relationship with the SEC. In an ideal setting, maybe SEC plays their conference playoff, and then they play the winner plays the best of the Big 12, Notre Dame, the Mountain West, AAC. I don't know. Maybe the Alliance. It's just crazy what's happening in college football where everyone's just out for themselves. You got to hope that the Big 12, with their relationship kind of loose with the SEC, can have some sort of tangible impact potentially. They got the SEC Big 12 basketball showdown. They were on the same page as the playoff, but if the SEC goes to their own playoff, and that's a distant thought, there's still a lot to kick on that, but it's a possibility. And if you're the SEC, why wouldn't you? I mean, I'd want to watch it. But I just think that how can you say you're a national champion when you're just only playing teams in your league? But then you argue, hey, these are the teams spending the most money on football. Anyway, something worth monitoring down the road this week with SEC meetings coming up, and then more conversation about the future of the college football playoff. I teased it at the beginning of the show and on this YouTube page. Again, appreciate all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. If you have any comments, questions, share them. I can get to them at the end of the show. And you can follow me on Twitter at Mitch_Harper. The 10 freshmen that I believe will make an impact for BYU football in 2022. Now, keep in mind, some of these players include redshirt freshmen, third-year freshmen because the COVID year. Some are true freshmen. But these are the guys that I feel will make an impact in some way. And an impact could be simply they get some game snaps. They're in the 2 deep. They're having a chance to play more than 4 games. They're getting the chance to actually play and contribute, whether it's special teams. They're going to have a presence in games this fall on Saturdays. These are the 10 guys I believe that'll be. We'll start off with quarterback, Jacob Conover. He's going to be the number 2 QB. There's going to be a game that he's going to have to start. You kind of bank on it, right? I mean, you hope not, because if Jaron Hall stays healthy, that guy could put up massive numbers and be outstanding. I mean, BYU last week got summer conditioning going. Good to see the pictures rolling through from the BYU social feeds. Summer conditioning really got intense. Started last week, and a lot of guys are on campus. It's all voluntary, but it's voluntary, but it's not. You know what I mean? Jaron Hall looks good. He's going to have a big year. But Jacob Conover, this is a big year for him. And I think that there's probably going to be a game where he starts. And I'm still a believer in Jacob Conover. I don't think anyone should write him off completely. He didn't shut the door completely that he's the head and shoulders number 2 guy, but I think once they kick it off, toe meets leather against South Florida, he will be the clear-cut number 2. And there's going to be a little bit more peace of mind, I think, from Jacob Conover. Listening to him down in St. George at the D1 camp, talking to young people, the guy has a presence that just sounds like a quarterback. He is an intelligent guy. He knows playbooks. He knows how to break down an offense. I think it's just, or defense, excuse me. I just think the guy just needs to get some more reps, get some more opportunities, get some more confidence built up. I think he's going to be good. I think Jacob Conover is a guy that can lead BYU in the Big 12 era. But he's definitely going to probably be that number 2 guy for BYU, in my opinion. Some young wide receivers that are on the come up for BYU. Cody Epps, Chase Roberts. You heard a ton about them in spring football. They will be in that top 5, top 6 of wide receivers. I think Chase Roberts is going to be wide receiver number 3. I think Cody Epps could be, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, somewhere in there. But they will have an impact. Roberts, he is kind of the next Gunnar Romney. And maybe in a best case scenario, if he stays healthy throughout his career, he's got a higher ceiling than what Romney has produced so far at BYU. There was a high projection on Gunnar Romney, and he still has the ability to put up some massive numbers this year because I think this BYU offense is going to be outstanding. But Roberts, we know Romney's dealt with a ton of injuries, and it's derailed maybe some of the high expectations coming in for him. The talent's always been there, but injuries have just been a thorn in the side for Romney. Roberts, if he can stay healthy, has a similar trajectory, I believe, and could be that next Gunnar Romney. He's a guy that's versatile, too. He could be a slot guy. He could be an outside receiver. He can do a lot of different things for Fesi Sitake in the passing games. I like Chase Roberts a ton, and I like Cody Epps' speed, too. Cody Epps' speed on like a track setting, he's not going to be this burner in the 100 meters like you see so many of these BYU recruits coming up. He's got football speed. You get the pads on him, and he looks a lot faster than what you would see maybe in a timed combine setting. That's just from what I saw in spring football. Offensive line, 2 guys, freshman linemen that you need to know about. Kingsley Suamataia, he's going to be your starting right tackle. I've been singing the praises of Kingsley. He's big time. He's a future NFL guy. I just think sky's the limit for him. He could be the next John Tate. I'll just say that right now. I think Kingsley Suamataia is that good. He's elite. Another guy, though, that I would not be surprised if he's on the travel roster and maybe he battles for 2 deep reps in fall camp. This is a name to keep an eye on. Out of St. George, Peter Falanico. I saw him at the D1 Dream Camp down in St. George. Looks like a grown man. I see him and I'm thinking, who is that guy? Because I'm like, new face. And I obviously, what's interesting about recruiting is when you don't see guys face to face all the time, you get fixated on their maybe 24/7 sports profile picture or their rivals picture, whatever it may be. And that's what you picture, that's what they look like until you then start see the college version of them. Falanico looks completely different. He's got a college ready body right away. He's only 17 too. He's going to be on campus this year. He's only 17. And I would not be surprised if he's pushing for an opportunity to play. Incredible strength. Falanico, underrated guy, meek, humble kid, outstanding person, great technique. I just think Falanico, he's one of those guys that I just think has a lot of potential. I also like Vai Suifua too from Orem. But I think Falanico, just seeing him in person, what he looks like, body type, he's ready to go. As far as physicality, he's only 17 too. It's crazy how impressive he looks for only being a 17-year-old kid. On the defensive side, Isaiah Moa. Moa, I don't think had this flashy spring like maybe Logan Fano was until Fano got the injury. But Moa, I think, is definitely going to contribute. There's no doubt about it. You could play him in a lot of different spots along the defensive line. I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to give you those moments where you see that elite talent in year one. I think in an ideal setting, though, you don't require him to be a key guy from the jump. If he emerges as that, great. But ideally, I think you want to see Tyler Batty, Atunai Samahe, Gabe Summers, Earl Tuioti Mariner, all those guys kind of be the key cogs on the D line. You're going to rotate them, keep them fresh. You hope those guys maximize all their abilities as their upperclassmen. But Mo is going to play. There's no question there. His talent's undeniable, but not as it's going to take time still. It's a little bit of a transition going from high school football, Weber High, to now college football. And that was what's ideal for him, is that he got to go through spring practices. Brooks Miley is another guy out of St. George, Pineview kid. Good talent in St. George. I gotta say, St. George has got some sneaky good talent. Falanico, Miley, Peyton Wilgar. St. George, a better recruiting hotspot than I would think. When you kind of take a step back and think of the talent BYU's got from there recently, good football being played down in St. George. Penny Sewell came from there, went to Oregon, now with the Detroit Lions. Miley, didn't see him much in spring. He was off to the sideline observing for whatever reason. Did see him at D1 Dream Camp. I think he's going to be someone that it's kind of that guy that doesn't get any hype, doesn't get any praise, but he'll do that 111th job that Elisa Tuiaki wants from an interior defensive lineman. That's Brooks Miley, just a solid 111th guy. And I think he could provide that in spots where you need to give a breather to some of those upperclassmen. Michael Daly. You know, you think about BYU football. One of the big knocks on the Cougars the last few years, and I've said it all along too, they're not getting enough pressure. They're not getting it to the quarterback. They're not getting enough sacks. They got to make those havoc-causing plays. That was a big talking point in spring football. Michael Daly is one of the guys, him and some more coming down the pipeline. There are talented guys coming for BYU that they have an elite skill, get to the quarterback, get a sack. Michael Daly can do that. He was one of the top sack artists at Lone Peak High School his senior year in high school. He had in the nation. He had 23 sacks his final year at Lone Peak. His brother, John Henry Daly, younger brother, who's still on a mission, he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. But Michael Daly sat out last year, part of the team. He dressed for the Independence Bowl. But he gave you moments in spring ball where you could see the talent. It takes time when you're coming back from a mission. Daly's going to be good, though. I think it'll be interesting to see where they play him. Could he maybe add some more weight and become a defensive end, maybe a hybrid OE spot? Does he go to the linebacker room? We'll see. But Daly's going to have a role. In the secondary, Corbin Green, to me, is the guy that I look at as the newcomers in the secondary that I think has an impact this fall. Out of Oklahoma, Big 12 country, signs with BYU. He's not – what's interesting about Corbin Green, too, is that BYU signed a bunch of DBs in this 2022 class, and a bunch of them are these just speedsters. You know, you're seeing like Evan Johnson running a 10.4 out in California. Zion Allen's running a 10.8 in the 100 meters, athlete of the year at his high school. Corbin Green's not that. I think his personal record in the 100 meters is 11.2. Great football instincts. So it's kind of like what I was mentioning about Cody Epps. Looks faster on the field when the pads are on. That translates. Doesn't look like the combine hero, but he's got great instincts as a cornerback. And General Guilford needs a plug-and-play guy. He needs guys that can fill out the depth. Gabe Judy Lally is going to come in from Vanderbilt. He's a grad transfer, still got 3 years to play. I think he's going to be an instant two-deep guy, and he's going to push and bring out the best in guys like D'Angelo Mandel and Caleb Hayes, who are going to be starters. But Judy Lally is going to be contending for that spot. And I think, Corbin Green's got a chance to maybe be that fourth defensive back, cornerback. Then it gives you the opportunity to get Jacob Robinson back to that nickel spot. And you kind of everything falls in place from a personnel standpoint, getting your best 11 on the field at all times. I think Corbin Green, he could be one of the true freshmen, because most of the true freshmen at BYU are sign and send, go on the mission. We'll see you in 2 or 3 years. You'll Gracier, all that noise. Corbin Green's going to be someone I think is we're talking about him coming up in fall camp. My last one at safety, Talon Alfrey. I think Talon Alfrey is coming back from the knee injury. He was well on his way, I thought, to being a potential starter last year in the 2021 season until he suffered that offseason injury where he blew out his knee. Working his way back, slowly but surely, but I think that he's going to work his way back and be on the field this year. I think he's in the 2 deep. That safety spot, kind of a little bit thin. I think that Chaz Ayu should be there. I think you go Chaz Ayu, Malik Moore, and call it a day. That's my opinion. But for whatever reason, it's not playing out like that. Chaz Ayu's been kind of a linebacker, been kind of a safety. Like, where is he going to play? To me, it's like put him at safety next to Malik Moore, and you're good. Like, that looked pretty good to me against Utah, right? He's getting the INT, making the big plays. BYU's defense looked great. Those linebackers in front of him were great. I mean, get Chaz Ayu at safety. But it feels like they've kind of moved him around to these hybrid spots, so it's left a little bit of an opening in that safety room. Ammon Hanneman's in the mix, too. I like Ammon Hanneman. I like his athleticism. I think he's going to be a bigger contributor this year. But Talon Alfrey, keep an eye on him. He's someone that I really like for BYU to contribute. Those are my 10 guys, though, for the BYU football team, the freshmen that I think are going to make an impact this 2022 season. What do you think? Share your thoughts, comments, or you can tweet at me at Mitch_Harper. Before we wrap up the podcast, I want to give a shout out to Elijah Bryant. Only the second guy in basketball history to go back-to-back years with a NBA title and then a EuroLeague championship. Wins his EuroLeague title out in Turkey. Congrats to Elijah Bryant. Great BYU basketball player. Great BYU career. When you look back in time and as the years pass, Elijah Bryant was a great player for BYU. And finally, BYU baseball. West Coast Conference Tournament gets started up this week. BYU is the 4 seed. They will play against LMU on May 25th on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. It's a single elimination in the first round. They expanded the field from 4 teams to 6 this year. So teams 3 through 6, opening round is single elimination. So BYU's got to win that game to advance. If they win, they'll play either Gonzaga or Portland, the top 2 seeds. Depends on who wins in the other game. And then it goes to that traditional double elimination format after that. But BYU baseball making a little bit of some noise down to the end of the season. Coach Platt stepping in as the interim coach. Seems like the way they're finishing, he seems like the odds-on favorite to win the job. And Tom Homo's been at all the home games for BYU down the stretch. He's seeing firsthand the job that they're doing. Kind of feels like, hey, just go with Coach Platt. Step in. He takes over the reins as BYU goes into the Big 12 Conference era. But that gets started up on Wednesday. WCC Baseball Tournament. BYU is the 4th seed, and we'll have you covered on KSLSports.com. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Mitch_Harper and follow KSL Sports on all social media platforms. We'll be back on Wednesday with a new edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. If you like this show, it's your first time watching, or you're a regular listener but just haven't subscribed, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, all major podcasting platforms. It's also available on KSLSports.com and the KSL Sports app. Talk to you on Wednesday here on Cougar Tracks.